Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the review of the 2018 two-year-olds. I hope everybody knows who I am, and I'm sure that you all know Gary O'Gorman over there, the senior flat handicapper from Ireland, who will obviously be available to talk to you after the meeting, should you have any questions for him. Unfortunately, two people can't be in the room with us today for various reasons. The BHA's lead two-year-old handicapper, Graham Smith, who you can see sitting away at us there. In the top right-hand corner, Mark Bird, who fills a similar position in Ireland. But thanks to the wonders of modern technology, they're here with us via video link. So hopefully things will happen very much as they have done in previous years. Just a quick run through before I hand over to Graham to get proceedings underway. We're hoping that this is going to take probably 45 minutes, an hour, maybe tops. We're going to spend 20 or 30 minutes talking about the top horses and a selection of horses from within the classification, and then possibly the bit that you'll enjoy most, the dark horses for 2019, according to Graham and Mark. So, enough of me waffling on. Graham, over to you to kick things off with Too Darn Hot.
Thanks, Dom. Morning, everyone. It was an above average year, 2018, at the top of the juvenile tree. No fewer than 6 horses rated 118 or more. Haven't seen that for quite a while. And that was primarily down to strung out finishes in the best races, which were the Dewhurst, the National Stakes in Ireland, and also the Middle Park. So when horses string out, those that finish to the fore end up with very, very big ratings, and that's what's happened. Too Darn Hot, in the process, in stamping himself firmly at the top of the class, has established himself as one of the very best two-year-olds of modern times. He's a fascinating horse to watch, and his trademark's a devastating top speed, which I'm sure you'd all agree. Historically, he really is a very good two-year-old. No two-year-old has been rated 126 as Too Darn Hot is since Frankel and Dream Ahead shared top honours back in 2010. Also, New Approach reached that level in 2007, and you have to go all the way back to Tsar in 1997 to find a horse that actually bettered that, and he finished the season rated 127. So we're talking a very special juvenile here. I would just like to point out, when the inevitable Frankel comparisons come, Frankel did improve another stone as a 3-year-old and 4-year-old beyond that. So we're not saying he's at Frankel superstar levels yet, but he's very, very good. He looked very good from day one. He would have fairly modest or fairly ordinary maiden at Sandown first time out, but he won it by 7 lengths. Next out was the Solario, much bigger test, and he came up against some good horses, including Arthur Kitt, who'd won the Chesham. Interestingly, all of those horses, all 6 horses from the Solario, have finished the season rated 103 or higher. So that's a very, very good standard of race. And Too Darn Hot absolutely smashed them by 4 lengths. He won with all sorts of authority. The form has stood up as well. I mean, Arthur Kitt went on to finish 4th in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Turf. At that stage, he was very exciting. Too Darn Hot, he never started bigger than even money for any of his 4 races. I believe he was long odds on. He was 4-11 when he went to the Champagne Stakes at Doncaster. Unsurprisingly, his main rival that day appeared to be Dark Vision, who'd created a really good impression winning the Vintage Stakes, and Dettori elected to attack him. It became apparent around halfway that horse wasn't turning up, and if I'm honest, Dettori was left rather out of his ground on Too Darn Hot, and it was a very special performance for him to get from that position to winning the race, and he won the race by 1 3/4 lengths from Phoenix of Spain, who, as we all know, went within a head of winning a Group 1 at Doncaster later on. So come the Dewhurst was clearly going to be the best 2-year-old race of the season. Too Darn Hot had superstar or potential superstar written all over him. There were strong form lines coming into it. Advertised, had won a Group 2 in the July Stakes. He'd won the Group 1 Phoenix Stakes. The only horse that had beaten him in 4 starts was Calix, who'd raced on the other side of the track in the Coventry. And Advertised had always promised to be suited by the step up to 7 furlongs, which he was getting in the Dewhurst. So he was a real player. Throw in Anthony Van Dyke as well, who'd finished a long way clear with Quarto in the National Stakes in Ireland. That form had already been endorsed when one of the beaten horses won the Royal Lodge. So there were some very strong form lines came together in the Dewhurst, and this is what happened.
About to approach the final 2 furlongs or so. Christmas pressurised by Anthony Van Dyke. Advertised making nearly a line of 3. Too Darn Hot just going to be angled out wide now by Frankie as Sangaris follows a similar route running down into the dip. Advertised took over from Anthony Van Dyke though. He's fighting back under the rail. Too Darn Hot out wide trying to join in. 3 in a line race up the hill inside the final furlong in the Dewhurst. And Too Darn Hot taking off out wide. Advertising Anthony Van Dyke and Too Darn Hot looking a very special 2-year-old and wins easily with Frankie saluting the crowd. Advertised in second, Anthony Van Dyke in third.
You can't get it to 126 on the time alone, but the time is only one part of the calculation, and you'll see that field was hugely strung out. He absolutely smashed the big 2 who you needed to turn up, who were the main opposition. There's another 4 lengths back to Sangarius and Q8 Currency, who both shown very useful form and won certainly listed races or above as well. That really was, as the commentator called it, a fantastic 2-year-old performance. He goes into winter quarters as the favourite and the clear favourite for the 2,000 guineas and the Derby. I know which race I'd rather be with him for. Definitely, while I like him for one and not so much for the other. But judging him on what he's done so far, he's a very, very special 2-year-old, and he's the best we've seen since Frankel and Dream Ahead.
Lovely, thanks, Graham. Can I just stop you there 1 second? Obviously, Graham's described him as a very special 2-year-old. Does anybody have any questions at this stage for Graham regarding Too Darn Hot? The answer appears to be no, Graham. Which one do you fancy him for, and which one is it you don't fancy him for?
He sets a great standard for the Guineas. 126 would win most Guineas. Obviously, there's the weight for age factor that he's got to mature the same level as your average horse would mature through the winter. But even if he doesn't, he still sets a great standard. He's not for me for the Derby. He could turn out to be a Derby horse, a middle distance horse. It's certainly in his pedigree. But if you delve into the pedigree, his sister, his full sister, Larty Dar, was second in the Ledger. She came to hand an awful lot later than Too Darn Hot. Somi Dar, his other full sister who won the Musidora, we didn't see anything like as much of her as a 2-year-old. And even the dam, Dare Me, she ran only once as a 2-year-old and she was beaten. You know, these were very, very good fillies, but very good fillies who came to hand only for a 3-year-old career. He's much earlier, much more precocious than they are. Factor into that, he's an exuberant sort. He doesn't settle 100%. And if he's going to give himself any chance of staying beyond a mile, he's going to have to learn. He's got fantastic speed in the finish of his races, and that doesn't lend itself to staying longer distances either. And one advantage we have these days is there's a lot of research going on into stride data as well. And I know Simon Rowlands is sort of leading the way on that. And the striking thing about Too Darn Hot is Simon's proved sort of the speed with which a stride is turned over a cadence often has a bearing on the likely stamina credentials of a horse. Too Darn Hot turns his stride over very, very quickly, much more quickly than you'd expect from a 1.5 mile horse. He strides like a miler. He races like a miler. He doesn't settle 100%. For me, until he proves otherwise, he's a miler, but he's a potentially very, very good one.
So, anything, having heard that, any questions for Graham on Too Darn Hot? No? Okay, moving on. Mark. Quarto.
Good morning. Dubawi was responsible for the first 2 in our list this year. So Too Darn Hot on 126, as Graham just said. And behind him then was Quarto on 121. And Quarto, his season began in late June and ended in mid-September. And he ran a total of 3 times. He was the first Dubawi to actually win a Group 1 at 2. So he stole a march maybe on Too Darn Hot in that regard, but obviously, you know, he's gone on to win a Group 1 2 as well. Another very promising colt. As Graham said, you know, we have a number of highly rated horses this year. There are 5 towards the top of the list that are all unbeaten, and I suppose, you know, they can all be described really as exciting colts. I suppose the parallels between Quarto and his sire Dubawi are very hard to ignore, really. They won both around 3 times as 2-year-olds and won 2 of the same races, the Superlative Stakes and the National Stakes. So I suppose just to go through his brief career, really, he won, first of all, over 6 furlongs at the end of June in Newmarket, where he sort of slipstreamed the leaders there and picked up very nicely. He went on then to the Superlative Stakes, up to 7 furlongs, where he beat probably not the best field ever assembled for that race, but he did it in quite good style, winning by 3 3/4 lengths. And I suppose he was very strong at the finish that day. Looked a very good horse. We rated him at 115 for that performance. But his best performance of the year came in the National Stakes in the Curragh, where he pulled clear with Anthony Van Dyke, beating 3 Group 2 winners in that race. Now, I suppose in terms of just looking at that race particularly, he was off a 9-week break there, having run in the Superlative. And the pace was probably no more than even to steady gallop. The time, not fantastic, but it does come out at about 12 pounds ahead of Skitter Scatter, who won the Moyglare on the same card over the same course and distance. In terms of the collateral form of that race, as I said, the first 2 did pull clear, and that was a feature of a lot of the races, as Graham alluded to earlier this year. And he, whilst Anthony Van Dyke did come back to him to a degree, having been passed, he did look in control from quite some way out, Quarto, and looked to be well on top at the end. Anthony Van Dyke, the second, went on to run 3rd in the Dewhurst. Subsequent to that, behind that, there were the Royal Lodge winner, Mohawk, the Richmond winner, Land Force, and also Christmas, who was a listed winner in Ireland over 7.5 furlongs. So I think that the form stacks up okay. He picked up impressively. The time for his last 3 furlongs was quite good. And, it was a race certainly full of promise. I suppose he, in terms of pedigree, again, possibly some of the same question marks maybe that he did with regard to Too Darn Hot. He, you certainly could argue on pedigree that, he could get 12 furlongs. The dam was placed in both the English and Irish Oaks. And the sire Dubawi obviously has sired horses like Postponed. However, I would be inclined to probably bracket him more as maybe a 10 furlong horse in my mind at this stage. I think, his sire obviously went on, ran 5th in the Guineas at 3, and he went on to win the Irish Guineas. Didn't do so well in the Derby, and then went back to a mile. Again, the way this horse races, he does settle, I think, quite well, which will help him. So I'd be more confident of him certainly getting 10, maybe, than even Too Darn Hot. But 12 could possibly be a little stretch. I think the trainer, obviously, he's had quite a stellar year. Knows Bowie's very well. And I think his initial reaction sort of post national stakes was that, he was an 8 furlong, maximum 10 furlong horse. And, I'd probably be bracketing him in that category at the moment. So there is going to be a lot of competition in the 8 to 10 furlong category this year with, Too Darn Hot, Quarto, and a number of others who we'll maybe talk about in a couple of minutes. But, he's a very exciting horse. He's rated 121 now, which is £1 below his below the rating that Dubawi had as a 2-year-old. He finished his 3-year-old career, I think, at 123. So, a very, very high class horse, this, and, could potentially go on to be better than 121 next year. But, certainly unbeaten for the moment and very exciting.
Lovely. Thanks, Mark. And whilst we've got you, just to sort of tidy up the Irish scene, or certainly the best of Aidan's 2-year-olds, or the highest rated of them, 10 Sovereigns. Do you want to give us a bit on that?
Yeah, 10 Sovereigns, again, he falls into the same bracket of being sort of an exciting, unbeaten colt. I'll maybe just go through it first and then we can watch the video of him maybe in the middle park. But he's 3 for 3, won his 3 races like Quarto. His season was a little shorter. He made his debut at the end of August and he signed off at the end of September in the middle park. I suppose the thing with him, he's a physically imposing colt. He's very big and he stands over a lot of ground. I suppose he's, in terms of pedigree, he's by no nay never. So an influence for speed, the Scat Daddy line, which is something, I think they're trying to go down that route a bit more in Coolmore, and the signs look very promising, really, based on his first season runners. We have him rated at 120 for his performance in the Middle Park, which is 1 pound actually ahead of his sire, Nona Never, what he achieved as a 2-year-old. So just to run through his career very briefly, I mean, he made his debut at the end of August in a 6-furlong maiden at the Curragh, and he won that race by 7 lengths. Now, just put that in context, you know, in the last 20 years, there have only been 9 horses that have won a 6-furlong maiden at the Curragh by 7 lengths or further. And, you know, I don't think any of them have won in a 25-runner field. So it was singularly impressive, and the time was very impressive. You know, people who are into sectional timing certainly, you know, took a lot of notice this day. It was one of the better sectional performances of the year. You know, the field, you know, probably not an outstanding maiden field, but there were a couple of winners to come from it since. And, you know, he certainly couldn't have done any more on his debut. Somewhat surprisingly, he turned out very quickly then, a week later, in the Group 3 Round Tower Stakes on good yielding ground at the Curragh over the same course and distance. And we had him running to about 111 on that occasion. Again, he didn't really see the whip in that race, and he really just asserted and won quite comfortably in the end, really on top of the finish. Again, probably, you know, no more than an average Group 3 field, you'd say he beat there. The second was a maiden. The third had been listed place. There was another horse back in the field who had been fourth in a group, who was subsequently fourth in a Group 3. So not a stellar there. So, but couldn't have done it any more impressively. But I suppose his big test really came in the Middle Park, where he was stepped up a month later. You know, with, I suppose, little experience really at this stage, and he met a similar colt really to himself in Jash, who had made his debut on the same day as 10 Sovereigns, the end of August, and had won subsequently quite impressively at Salisbury since then. And again, both in common with a lot of the better races this year, both of these colts pulled clear of the field in the Middle Park, and looked to be two nice prospects. What I noticed in the Middle Park, I mean, we'll see the video in a second, but you know, when you watch it, it was the first time really, I suppose, 10 Sovereigns was asked a question, really, you know, asked to race, and you know, he changed his legs quite a lot. He was showing the whip really for the first time, so he looked, you know, to a degree a little clueless on that occasion. But you know, I think his class got him through, and you know, he certainly it looked a good performance. The form of that race looks quite strong. It was actually, in terms of time, an interesting one. You know, it was actually the second fastest time in the race for the last 25 years. But I suppose, comparatively speaking, and looking at times on the day, it doesn't compare. You know, it's not outstanding. You know, it's just, it was 0.09 faster than the Cheveley Park. You know, where I think 4 lengths covered the first 8 fillies that in that race. So you wouldn't get too carried away maybe with the time, even though, you know, ostensibly it was, you know, one of the fastest in the last 25 years for the race. You know, the race itself, the first 2 pulled clear, as I say. The third horse, Rumble in the Jungle, had won the Molecombe over 5 quite impressively before that, and was trying 6 furlongs here for the first time. So I suppose, you know, if you wanted to be, you know, cast some doubt in the form, you could argue whether that horse got the 6 furlongs here. I'd be inclined to think he did. I thought he was never more really at Goodwood than at the end of the Molecombe. In fourth was the Anglesey winner, Marie's Diamond, who was also second in the Richmond. And then you had the Jim Crack first and second further behind, Emirati Anna, who's a May foal. You know, could have a lot of improvement in him next year. And Legends of War. And further behind that was the Cornwallis winner, Sergei Prokofiev. So it was quite a deep field here. And, you know, I think that the fact that the first 2 were able to pull clear, you know, highlighted them both as potentially very good colts for next year. So we pegged that race at 120. So maybe it might be time to watch the video now, just to have a look at that, and just watch, as I say, he looks quite green towards the end of this race.
Furlong, Rumble in the Jungle, and Marie's Diamond, tracked by the odds-on favourite 10 Sovereigns. Jash close up 2 with Emirati Anna on the far side. Space Traveller tries to improve, followed by Legends of War, and Sergei Prokofiev still at the rear of the field. Heading on now inside the final 2 furlongs in the Middle Park. 10 Sovereigns is shaken up now by Donegal O'Brien, seeking this treble today, but immediately tackled by Jash. It's 10 Sovereigns into the dip from Jash in second. Rumble in the Jungle and Emirati Anna. 10 Sovereigns by a length than Jash. Jash is sticking to the task on the near side, trying to attack, trying to rally. 10 Sovereigns is all out, falling on from Jash up towards the line. 10 Sovereigns, still unbeaten, wins the Middle Park from Jash second. Rumble in the Jungle third, and Marie's Diamond back in fourth.
Okay, so I say that, you know, I think that was quite impressive. I suppose looking with regards to the future for him, I suppose the question really, you know, again, what distance, you know, he proved best at. you know, I suppose there may be a temptation to step him up to a mile to try and go for a guineas. There might not be that many prospects for the 2000 guineas in the stable for next year. So there would be a temptation there. But I mean, I think everything that I can see points to this horse being really a sprinter. You know, Graham referenced the you know, the data for leg speed or cadence, and I think he shows up, you know, as a sprinter really on those metrics, on the figures that I've seen. I just know that, I mean, Aidan has had, I think, 24 Group 1 winners over 6 furlongs at 2, and only 2 of them have managed to go on to win a classic, and they were Master Craftsman and George Washington, but the remainder really ultimately ended up as sprinters, and, you know, I'd see him falling into that category. The sire, obviously, was very fast, 2-year-old winning the Prix Morny. The dam, I suppose, offers a little more hope maybe in that regard. She was placed over 11 furlongs in a listed race in France. But certainly he looks as if, to me, as if he takes after the stallion quite closely. You know, the stallion has made a fantastic start with 6 stakes winners in its first crop, 4 of them rated over 100 here in Ireland. You know, so for me, he looks and races like a sprinter. And I suppose in that context, I mean, you know, the sprinting division, you know, on his rating of 120, he would be, you know, not far off some of the better 3-4-year-old sprinters in Europe and the world. So, you know, I think there's everything to be gained. There are races now for him with things like the Commonwealth Cup, you know, which, you know, wouldn't have existed obviously years ago. So, you know, I think, you know, he has good prospects really. Personally, I think if he stays in the sprinting division, and, you know, in any case, he looks very exciting. And as I say, he's rated 120 for that performance in the Middle Park, which puts him 3rd on our list for the year.
All right. Thanks, Mark. Any questions?
Mark, can I ask?
Yeah, sure. Carry on, Marcus.
Mark, you said there about not moving too many prospects within the O'Brien stable for the guineas. I think there are 25 horses rated 112 or above, of which 6 are trained by Aidan. Do you have any? Could you tell me historically? My sort of my memory is that last year that was that Aidan's 2-year-olds were far more dominant in that top echelon of the ratings. So to sort of compare previous years, how Aidan sort of moving on.
Yeah, I think in the classification, I think he's got 16 runners, or 60. Yeah, there are 20 Irish horses on the list rated at 110 or above, and I think 16 are Aidan's. But I suppose when you go down individually and pick through them, I mean, sorry, and just to compare that, I think it was 15 last year and 16 the year before, and you know, that's as many as he's ever had, you know, rated 110 plus as 2-year-olds. Historically, it's been more 9, 10, and so on. But I suppose when you pick down through the list and look at the pedigrees and so on, you know, there's a lot of the, you know, the staying types. I suppose the Galileos. Australia has now become a factor. There are 3 Australias on the list this year already, rated 110 or more. And, you know, the likelihood is that they're probably going to prove, you know, more staying types next year. You know, the ones who have more prospects, maybe, you know, at shorter distances, I suppose you're looking at 10 sovereigns. I would think probably is next on the list really is Anthony Van Dyke, and I would think, you know, as a May foal by Galileo, I think he's probably likely to be better over a trip next year. Magna Graecia, I suppose further down, he's by Invincible Spirit. He's got prospects maybe of being a shorter runner. I think to see him maybe as a miler, but you know, he rates quite a bit below some of the top horses. You know, what's going to be, I think, a competitive year. You know, on the filly side, you've got Fairyland, who probably looks, you know, a short runner. But you know, there aren't, you know, Japan, Mount Everest, those kind of horses, Circus Maximus, Western Australia, they all look to me like staying types, and I don't think I've seen anything particularly that's not on this list that you know, would strike me as being an outstanding miler this year. So you know, I think whilst there are, you know, quite a number of Aidan's horses on the list, you know, I would say certainly the majority of them perhaps being more certainly 10 furlongs and plus horses, as opposed to sort of milers and below.
Anything else for Mark on that particular topic, or no? Graham, back to you. First of all, briefly, if you've got anything to add on Quarto or 10 sovereigns, and if you don't, let's move on to the best filly, Pretty Pollyanna.
Yeah, I'm quite happy to move on straight to Pretty Pollyanna. It hasn't been a vintage year in terms of the fillies. I mean, we know the colts were strong. Pretty Pollyanna's class-topping 116 for fillies is slightly below standard for the last decade or so. And she's probably not a stereotypical champion filly. I mean, her star shone brightest at the height of summer. There was a 5-week period where she looked very, very special indeed. But she didn't really fire in either of the big autumn Group 1 she went for. She was 6-4 for the Cheveley Park. She finished only 4th that day. And fair enough that the events in the Cheveley Park did cost Sylvester de Souza the ride going forward. But in my mind, she just wasn't the same filly as she'd been at the height of summer anyway. She was then tried in the Fillies Mile, and I'm pretty convinced that while she wasn't obviously stopping at the finish, she was beaten by a couple of stronger stayers, so I'd perhaps be willing to forgive her that. But there is quite a chance that precocity was her strength in the summer, and you can see by 33-1 odds for the 1,000 guineas, there's a general feeling that that might well be the case. But for those 5 weeks in summer, she was special. She was very, very good. And the way her form stacked up, it was the best form from the fillies in Europe, at least, throughout the season. And she starts in June. She won an ordinary enough maiden at Yarmouth, and the Albany, turns out in hindsight, was a very good run to finish 5th. It was just a week on from a debut. She came from a lot further back than the 2 that beat her in her group. They were the first 2 home. And it wasn't hugely encouraging at the time, and it saw her go off 20-1 for the Duchess of Cambridge at Newmarket. But with hindsight, we should have taken notice. And here's what happened in the Duchess of Cambridge.
They help towards halfway. La Pelosa, Main Edition, and Pretty Pollyanna are the 3 who dispute the lead. A couple of lengths then back to find Angel's Hideaway. Then came Come On Leicester and Chicas Amigas and Gossamer Wings. Now dropping right out Alicia Darcy. Chaleurs also under pressure. It's Pretty Pollyanna and Sylvester de Souza who lead by a good length and a half. There's a race inside the final furlong and a half. From in second, Angel's Hideaway. Just getting tied up there. Main Edition, a real bumping match with La Pelosa there. As they head inside the final furlong, Pretty Pollyanna is well clear from Angel's Hideaway in second. Then came Gossamer Wings in third. But this will be impressive for Pretty Pollyanna, getting right away to win the Duchess of Cambridge in some style. Pretty Pollyanna from Angel's Hideaway second, Chaleur in third, Gossamer Wings was taken fourth.
There's no escaping the fact that that was a rough race, and Angel's Hideaway did quite a lot of damage to some of the other fillies. Certainly Main Edition and La Pelosa, who'd been the first 2 in the Albany, had their chances compromised. But whichever way you look at that, I think she'd have smashed them up anyway. It was a hugely impressive success. Angel's Hideaway, beaten 7 lengths. She wasn't inconvenienced by the trouble. She caused a bit, but she had every chance. Next time out, she went and won the Princess Margaret at Ascot. The 3rd placed filly, Chaleur, she came out a few months later and won a nursery in a very, very competitive fillies nursery from a good mark, so she was useful. We rate the form 116. The time goes a long way to backing that up. Impressions say she was great. At 116 was the best performance in the Duchess of Cambridge since Attraction won the race, and we all know what she went on to do. It was better, rated a pound better than what Sandra Camillo did, and she was a pretty special 2-year-old as well. So that looked good. It was a question of whether we could believe it or not entirely. But she then went on to the Mornay, and it was the same again, really. She had to work a little bit harder to beat Senora Cabello. But when you put that into context, Senora Cabello was coming on a winning streak. She'd won the Marygate at York. She'd won the Queen Mary. She'd won the Robert Papin. And she was a very, very tough and high-class filly herself. And it was 4 lengths back to True Mason that day, who went on to shine in the Millreef. He was second. Along with the Duchess of Cambridge form, the Mornay form stood up. And even though Pretty Pollyanna didn't really go on from that, we still think, and we still confidently feel, that those 2 races were the best form amongst the fillies in Europe.
Great, thanks, Graham. Well, there we are. There's a rundown of the top horses on the list. Any questions before we move on to 1 or 2 others of interest? No? All quiet. So back to you, Graham. 1 or 2 others that you've picked out for discussion. Calyx.
Yeah, we just thought further down the list, there are a couple that maybe didn't get the opportunity to cement their places a bit higher, but they're well worth looking out for. And Calyx is definitely one. His season spanned only 11 days in June, but by Jove, he made a good impression. First time out at Newmarket, they went steady through the first 3 furlongs. And to compare the time with the handicap on the card, that was soundly run. You know, they didn't go too fast in that. they were lengths and lengths behind at halfway. And for him to burn through the last 3 furlongs and record a very, very good time comparison with that handicap was a special performance. Couple in the fact he pulled 5 lengths clear of the second, who in turn pulled 6 lengths clear of the third, and you could see why everyone was getting excited. That was enough to see him go off 2-1 favourite in the Coventry, which is slightly muddling race, and it was tricky to marry him up with the second and third horses who raced on the opposite side of the track. They were advertised and Sergei Prokofiev, but they both won group races and good group races after that. If you look at Calix on his side of the track, he smashed Blown by Wind by 6.5 lengths, who proved both before Ascot and after Ascot that he was a solid horse at around 96. That's 115 performance all day long, which is pretty special just 11 days into his career. Unfortunately, Calix was robbed of the opportunity to show himself genuinely top class beyond that by, I think he suffered a setback. But I believe he's back for 2019. And if Too Darn Hot isn't giving John Gosden enough sleepless nights, then Calix is one of several in the stable that could be exciting him as well. There's got to be a major doubt how far he's going to stretch. He's not going to go beyond a mile, I wouldn't think. If he's going to go a mile, that's not guaranteed at this stage. He's got a lot of the Kingman speed. There's a lot of 6 furlong high-class form within his pedigree. And he certainly races like he's got an awful lot of speed the way he kicked clear at Ascot. So he could be another to factor into a very, very exciting sprint division this season. And it could well be the Commonwealth Cup. 10 Sovereigns isn't going to have it all his own way.
Mark, over to you. Mad Moon.
Yeah, I suppose Mad Moon is very similar really to Calix there in terms of profile. 2 runs, 2 wins. And you would maybe think that, just hasn't had the opportunity possibly to have a better rating than 115 based on sort of the fact that he's only had 2 runs. But I mean, he couldn't have been really any more impressive on both of those starts. The first was in Leopardstown in the middle of August, where he won comfortably by 2.5 lengths from Sydney Opera House. At the time, it didn't look, outstanding for him, but Sydney Opera House, obviously has gone on to run second in the Royal Lodge and the Criterium de Saint Cloud. So, not a bad horse. And he beat him really without coming off the bridle that day. A month later, he turned up on Irish Champions Weekend in the KPMG Champion Juvenile race. And again, he was faced with quite a lot of opposition from the O'Brien Yard. I think 3 horses, all by Australia, against him that day. And he put the race to bed very easily. Was always travelling well, picked up smartly, got 3 to 4 cracks of the whip, and really won very comprehensively. So it looks very, very exciting. I mean, that race in Leopardstown, he beat Broome, who went on to come second in the Jean-Luc Lagardère. He beat Western Australia, who was third in what used to be the Racing Post, the Vertam Futurity. And Sydney Opera House was further behind him that day than on debut, and they've gone on to come second in the Royal Lodge and the Criterium de Saint Cloud. And there was also Massaf, who was second in a Group 3 here in Ireland subsequently. So I think it's quite a strong form line, and he did win pretty comfortably that day. So he seems to have this nice blend of speed and stamina. Arguably he was faced with probably staying types in Leopardstown, and he had a bit more speed than them. I suppose if you look at the picture of 2-year-old, I said there are 5 colts who were unbeaten: Too Darn Hot, Quarto, 10 Sovereigns, Calix, and this guy. And if you look at the profile of them after 2 runs, I guess, he's right in the mix. There were, I think Too Darn Hot, we had maybe on 116 after a second start, but we had Calix 115, we have had Quarto 115, 10 Sovereigns 111 with a big, plus, I think, on that. And this guy 115 after his 2 starts. So he's right in the mix. So there's nothing to say, I suppose, if on his 3rd start that he won't go on, just as, 10 Sovereigns and Quarto and so on have done. He remains hugely exciting. The trainer obviously has trained training for a long time and has trained a number of good 2-year-olds. I think Kingsfort and Hatef, who was 4th in the Dewhurst. Kingsfort won the national stakes back in 2009. I think they were both rated 116, so £1 ahead of this horse. But he's right in the mix amongst the best 2-year-olds really that the trainer has had. He's also from the same family as Autad, who won the Irish Guineas a couple of years back. Generally, I suppose the family in terms of pedigree, his by dawn approach, it was quite precocious. Won the Coventry, the National, the Dewhurst. and guineas. On the dam side, you know, there's a lot of sort of 10 furlong performers generally. I would have always had a slight suspicion that a lot of the family did like a little dig in the ground. So I think there was a little concern before Leopardstown that, you know, they were slightly anxious about the ground maybe being too fast, but he seemed to handle it very well on the day. But that might be just a little question mark maybe for him looking ahead. But, you know, he looks hugely exciting. I said two for two, and it'll be very interesting to see where he goes in terms of distance. You know, you'd imagine he should be capable of getting 10 furlongs, but I think the plan initially would be probably the Irish Guineas over 8, and you know, so again another 8 to 10 furlong performer. So I think that, you know, the competition is going to be really strong in those two categories this year.
Lovely, thanks, Mark. And Graham, I think you wanted to have a word about Persian King, who was the top rated of the 4 French 2-year-olds in the list.
He is indeed, Dom, and I think we've got to mention Persian King. He's raced 4 times. The only horse to beat him was Anador, who beat him on debut, and Anador turned out to be a very good horse himself. He's rated 111 in the classification, having finished 3rd in the Lagardère when arguably he didn't have the rub of the green. But Persian King moved onwards and upwards from that anyway. He won twice in France, and then he came over for what turned out to be a very strong autumn stakes. The second horse, Magna Grecia, went on to win the Group 1 Verton Trophy at Doncaster. The fourth horse, Western Australia, went on to finish a close 3rd in that Group 1. But Persian King had too much for them. 2 striking things about him. One is he's massive. He's got to be the most handsome. He's got to be the biggest and the most handsome horse in the entire classification this season. Secondly, the theme of that race, the Autumn Stakes at Newmarket, was they went fast. They went very hard, and you'll see Western Australia, who forced the pace, he dropped away to be beaten 6.5 lengths. He was beaten less than a length in a Group 1 next time. Persian King raced a lot closer to that hot pace than the runner-up Magna Grecia did. And not only that, he could have gone faster. He tanked into a very, very hot pace and yet still had enough to see off a subsequent Group 1 winner in the finish. That was a big performance, potentially bigger than a 1:14 would suggest. He's got size, he's got scope, he's got an excellent trainer in Andre Fabre. There's every chance that while there's 10 horses sitting above him in the classification at present, come this time next year for the 3-year-old classification, he could easily be a fair bit higher up. There's a lot of 10 furlong form on the dam side of his pedigree, but there's a lot of speed in him as well. He's by Kingman. I'm not going to make any predictions whether he stays beyond a mile, but I am going to suggest he's very good.
Lovely, thanks, Graham. So the guys have been through the top horses in the classification. Any questions at this stage before they move on to the dark horses? Marcus?
Well, just on the French, is 3 a good number for the French? They've had a very quiet few years with their older horses. What is 3 average for them or below average?
3 is not a good number for the French, Marcus. Their average since 2000 has been 8. The last few years, 2017 they had 7, 2016 they had 10. We have noticed a slight decline in the French in the last few seasons, but 3 is a modest year, I'm afraid, for them.
Graham?
You said the fillies are a relatively ordinary bunch. We're hoping to see a newspaper of record over here later on. I mean, have you got a provisional figure for that?
Yeah, glad you've asked about that one, Graham. Actually, I was going to bring her up later on. It's not always easy to bring a horse from America over to Britain. You know how they race there. It's a 2-turn mile. She's been tackling oval track, flat track. But if it goes in terms of ability, she's head and shoulders above what we've seen in Europe this season. She looked very, very impressive in her prep. I think it was the Miss Grillo. That was a prep for the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Turf Fillies. She did exactly the same against a high-quality field in the Breeders' Cup itself. She beasted them from the start. She recorded a fantastic time on the clock, if you judge it against Line of Duty, who won the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Turf for Colts. It was a great overall time. It was a great run through the sectionals as well. She smashed them up by around 7 lengths. If she can translate that form to Britain next season, they're going to have a hell of a job coping with her. She might not be coming for the Guineas. I'm not entirely sure what the plans are, but I think as things stand, she's set for Ascot in the Coronation. It's not your stereotypical US bred, US foaled, US trained filly coming over. She's British bred, she's British sold, she has the pedigree to cope with it over here. I'm really looking forward to seeing her because she is potentially very, very special.
Anybody else?
I can tell it's a figure, how special.
Come on, Graham.
Sorry, Graham, I didn't quite catch that.
You actually have a figure. You said one of those special.
I mean, we don't publish figures for the US, as you'll know. My private figure is 123. I haven't published that anywhere, but we'll give you that as a guide. That puts us £7 ahead of Pretty Pollyanna, who, let's be honest, her form didn't really see last season through.
And historically, what was that compared? What was she? Never feeling that good in the last. I can't even remember.
I wouldn't go to war on that figure, Graham, but historically it's massive. Lady Aurelia was 121, I think, as a 2-year-old.
I think Minding was as well.
Yeah, I think Minding 120, Lady Aurelia 121, 122 Queen's Logic was the best we've seen. You have to go all the way back to 1978 and 129 for the champion 2-year-old filly, but make of that what you will. As I say, I wouldn't go to war and tell you she's definitely head and shoulders above Minding and definitely head and shoulders above Lady Aurelia, because we don't have quite the same confidence in the US figures, but she's good. 2 ways about it. Whether I'm a pound or so out, I don't know, but she's good.
Okay. Any more? Before these two start delving slightly deeper into the 2-year-olds and finding 1 or 2 dark horses for you? No? Okay, Graham. The man goes without parole last year as a dark horse.
Yeah, thanks, Dad. I'm trying to concentrate on horses that have run only once that perhaps might not be in the public eye yet. And I've come up with 4 that I think make a splash this season. I've already said I think the miling division is going to be strong from the horses that have topped the 2-year-old list already. They're probably milers. So I've tried to concentrate on a couple for the Derby trials instead. The one I really like, absolutely love him, in fact, is Dubai Warrior. He's a colt of John Gosden's who made his debut at Chelmsford in November. The pedigree is good. He's by Dan Silly, and his dam, Mabuba, she won over 7 furlongs in a Group 1 as a 2-year-old in South Africa. She won a 1.5 mile listed race here, and she won the UAE 1,000 guineas, and I think she won a 9 furlong Group 2 over there. She's already produced a full brother of his that Hugo Palmer trained, named Muta Sadir. He won a Group 3 over 11 furlongs in Ireland last season, so the pedigree is a good one for middle distances. There's more than that to him, though. I mean, he won a reasonable race at Chelmsford, but by God, he was impressive. They didn't go that hard through the early stages, and he made up an awful lot of ground on the clock through the last 3 furlongs to post a very, very respectable time. When you factor in that he drew 4.5 lengths clear of some rivals who have franked the form subsequently, it becomes all the more impressive, particularly considering he was never flat out and he was even eased down in the finish. As I say, I don't think he's going to be a miler. I think we'd probably be going towards the Derby trials and then hopefully something better beyond that. He might run only once, but if he's not extremely special, I'll be absolutely amazed. I think he's a very good horse, and he's definitely one to pen in the notebook. The second horse I'd like to flag up, and he might be in the mile division, is Scardu. I say the milers are strong as 3-year-olds, and a lot of them look like training on. If there is a dark horse that can ruffle a few feathers, I'm pretty sure there's a good chance it's Scardu. Have a look at the video, and I'll tell you about it afterwards.
Scardu slightly further back, Montawage, his neck driven along together with Valence, and No Trouble has found himself a long, long way behind. Wings of Time still right at the back of the field, sharing last place with the Gill brothers as they now race down with 2 furlongs left to go. Toad the Baron's now been headed. Carnival, a narrow leader, but quickly pounced upon by Estidaf in behind those. The white cap of Valorum and Scardu making eye-catching progress next. They're clear of Uzo. On the rail, Scardu's packing quite a punch late in the day here. And Scardu comes through to take up the running. Getting the hang of things very late is Valorum on the outside of Estidaf. But Scardu is impressive on debut. Won well from two of the Godolphin horses. Valorum pushed Estidaf close for second place. Carnival was fourth, but that was...
Yeah, the market didn't really point to Scardu. I think he was sent off 33 to 1 for that debut, and he certainly knew an awful lot less than the third and fourth horses. Certainly the third, Estidaf, he'd already run to a figure in the 80s when touched off at York. He went on to win next time out, and he ended up with a rating of 89. The fourth horse, Carnival, ended up with a rating of 82, having won his following start. Scardu gave them a start in a race where they were quickening through the last couple of furlongs. And not only did he make the ground, but he surged right past. His pedigree is an interesting one. He's by Shamadal, who does get them to stay a little bit beyond a mile. But the dam showed her fairly useful form over 7 furlongs as a 2-year-old. And much of her pedigree does suggest 7 as well. As I say, as far as the dark horses go, I think he's probably the one that's going to ruffle a few feathers if one of them does in the mile division. I'm hoping he'll start in a race like the Greenham, and we'll take it from there. Third horse I'll flag up. I don't think we've got the video for this, but this is another one of John Gosden's called Sucellus. We didn't see him actually until Wolverhampton in early December. 8.6 furlongs. And the striking thing about this performance was he had absolutely no chance from where he raced. He was too green, basically, and he got an awful long way back in a modesty run race. The principals were, well, the place horses were nothing special. Nabil had been 4.5 lengths or more behind Dubai Warrior on his previous run. But nevertheless, Sucellus gave him a massive start. I mean, turning in, you just knew he couldn't get competitive as they were sprinting and some lengths in front of him. But somehow he did. He absolutely shot down the straight to win really, really impressively, even though it was only by half a length. Looking into his pedigree, he's by Dan Silly. The dam showed smart form around 10 furlongs. I think she won a couple of listed races and she was placed at minor pattern level. It's hard to really pin your colours to the mast on this one and say this is definitely a top horse because he's only run to a figure around 83 on my ratings. And even then, that's with a bit extra in for the ground he gave up at the start. But there's just something about the way he quickened from a hopeless position and flew straight past them in the straight, despite not really knowing what he was doing. It's got to be a Derby trial for him, and I would be hoping that we see him figure quite prominently in those races before hopefully going on to something better. And the fourth horse I'd like to show is a filly. Thought we ought to throw a filly in. She's named Dancing Vega. Now, I'll give a bit of background here. Rafe Beckett got 4 horses by Lope de Vega, 4 fillies for this owner. He did a fantastic job with all of them. Feliciana de Vega, she won both her races. She won a novice and then she went to Deauville in, I think it was late November, and she won a listed race. Manuela de Vega won both her races, the second of them being a listed race at Pontefract, the Silver Tankard. And Antonia de Vega, she won first time, second time out, she won the Prestige at Goodwood. So that's 3 very, very good black type races already under the belt. Dancing Vega, she didn't get the opportunity to contest a listed or group race. But by God, she made a great impression at Doncaster on her debut. I think we have the video here if you want to look, and I will talk you through it afterwards.
That's it, that's it. They're off, racing over a mile. Garcia in the dark blue and also Royal Countess in the purple and yellow were the 2 slowest to get away from the stalls. And once again, they begin to migrate just a little off the near side running rail, and through the first furlong is Ambling, who ambles on in front, a couple of lengths clear to Just My Type in a spotted jacket racing in second. Dancing Vega off a steady early pace free with the pedal sleeves, racing just third ahead of Chamamea towards the far side. Break of a couple of lengths then to Catalog with a yellow cap racing upsides gracefully done, the purple and white. A nose-bounded filly, She's Awake, is in the last group of 4 with Blue Gardenia out in the centre of the track. Garcia held up last for 1 and Royal Countess at the back of the field. Ambling then leading them down towards halfway, quite effortlessly as well. She strides over 2 lengths ahead of Just My Type and the white-faced Dancing Vega giving immediate pursuit. And then Chamomere and a yellow jacket racing in fourth. Couple of lengths away to Gracefully Done, being shaken along from Catalogue as they pass the 3. Then Blue Gardenia from Garcia, She's Awake and Royal Countess. Ambling then with 2.5 furlongs left to travel. Now just being asked for a little bit more in front as Dancing Vega moves up to challenge on the near side within a half length. Ambling shaken up and Dancing Vega is doing it quite stylishly at the moment, so she draws alongside. Then Just My Time Gracefully Done on the near side from Chamomere and Blue Gardenia. Dancing Vega has sauntered into the lead, flashing past the furlong, and she's asked to stretch. She immediately bans 3 lengths clear. Blue Gardenia is giving chase from Ambling and Gracefully Done, but Dancing Vega is drawing right away in the style of a very useful filly. Dancing Vega, hard held, impressive. Blue Gardenia in second, Ambling in third, and Gracefully Done was back in.
Yeah, Dancing Vega was racing against more experienced fillies. She did clearly know her job, but it was still really impressive to see her take control of that race on the bridle, and then she shot away for a squeeze. Let's see how the form stacks up, and it's incredible that the second filly, Blue Gardenia, next time out, she won the listed Montrose Stakes at Newmarket, so there's lots of substance to the form, and the third is pretty established as a high 70s filly too. Cursory glance at her pedigree, she's by Lope de Vega as well. The Dam won 2 Group 1s in New Zealand. I think she won from 6 furlongs to a mile. She's already produced a Group 3 winner at, I think it was 10 furlongs. That horse won at a mile and 10 furlongs. There's lots in Dancing Vega's pedigree that suggests she'll probably stay 10 furlongs, but I wouldn't have any qualms about her at a mile, looking at the speed she showed there. And she is quoted somewhere near the top of the Guineas market, I believe. She might be around 20 to 1. If she was mine, she'd be stopping off there, hopefully en route to the Oaks. We had a few Group 1 winners in the Dark Horses section over the last couple of years. We haven't had a Classic winner yet, and I'm hopeful that certainly within that 4 we might get there, with the highlights possibly Dancing Vega and, of course, Dubai Warrior.
Lovely. Thanks, Graham. Mark, looks as though you've got 2 or 3 you want to send our way.
Yeah. I just prefaced my comments by saying that the 2 I tipped up last year didn't see the racecourse, so I mean,
Wow.
get jinxed on these horses. It can only get better. Okay, so I suppose first of all, I think there's going to be very strong competition in the sprint, mile, even 10 furlong categories this year. So I've kind of looked more at sort of potentially our more 12 furlong types, Oaks, Derby type horses. And I think on the list that we have, there are a couple there who I think, whilst they have shown decent form up to now, I think could improve quite significantly. Mount Everest and Hermosa on the filly side, I think would be 2 I'd look at. They're both Mayfalls, and I think they could have a bit of upside still as they go forward. But I mean, a bit more under the radar horses who haven't competed maybe in Pattern Company. I would highlight a filly from the O'Brien stable, Chablis. She won a back end 7 furlong fillies maiden in Goran Park on the 23rd of October, I think. Nothing remarkable about the form. She had a nice trip, had a good draw, picked up nicely. I'd say she won in uncomplicated style, really. But where I'm coming from, really, I suppose, with this one is if you look at the Aidan O'Brien stable during the year, I think he ran a total of 89 individual 2-year-olds in Ireland. I think 51 of them managed to win. But when you chisel down a bit further, there was actually only 9 of them who actually won first time out. And that was a very noticeable trend all year. There were, a lot of even the good horses were running down the field on their first starts, gradually improving and coming along. Of the 9 that won first time out, in 3 colts included 10 Sovereigns and Magna Graecia. They were pretty good. On the filly side, there were 6 fillies that won first time out. Fairyland, Group 1 winner. Fleeting, Group 2 winner. Just Wonderful, Group 2 winner. So Perfect, a Group 3 winner. And the other 2 then were Frosty, who's a sister to Winter. She won her maiden in Dundalk, but then she disappointed in the Also Sharp Stakes. And the other one then who didn't get the opportunity to run in pattern races was this filly Chablis. So she made her debut quite late in the season, but I think she has the potential to go on maybe over middle distances next year. So I'd expect to see her maybe in one of the 10 furlong trials, maybe the early part of the season. She's by Galileo out of Vadawina, who was the winner of the Prix Saint-Adrien in France. Which makes her a full sister here to the Pentagon, who was a little disappointing, has to be said, as a 3-year-old, but was quite a good horse at the same time. So I would see sort of a vacancy there, really, in terms of the staying trips for fillies this year. I don't think there's any obvious ones on the list who are, most of the fillies that we have on the classification are more shorter runners. So I think there is an opportunity for fillies to step forward this year. I think she could be one. Another one from the same yard that I'd highlight is a filly called Quote. And she's a little more under the radar, if anything. She only had the one run in a back end maiden again in Leopardstown in October, over a mile. She finished 9th of 20 there, so fairly unremarkable really on the face of it. But when you actually look at the race, it was a very slowly run race, about 3 or 4 seconds slower than the other 8 furlong races on the card. And she was out the back, with 1 or 2 just behind her turning in. But she really ate up the ground in the straight and, was really flying at the finish. Very difficult to pull up after the race, which I think is always a good sign as well. Now, she has a long way to go, obviously, to be a pattern contender. But I was quite taken by the way she came home that day. She's a half-sister to Seismos, who was a Group 1 winner in Germany over 12 furlongs and was 3rd, I think, in the Canadian International. So there is a bit of a pedigree there as well. It's a top-class German family, really, a very stout pedigree. In terms of, it's the family of, the dam was a sister to Schiaparelli, who won the Goodwood Cup. So I think, with time, she could again improve quite considerably, and maybe in staying races, you could see her do well. The last one I have on the list is actually an English horse, English trained, Al Hilali. He is by Dubawi. He's obviously having a great year, and out of the first fall out of Ambivalent, who won the Pretty Polly at the Curragh, as a 3-year-old, I think. This one had 2 runs, 2 wins. It made its debut at Newmarket, where it looked quite green. I thought it was running around a bit, yet still managed to win by 3 3/4 lengths. Then went on 5 weeks later to run in the EBF Criterium in Deauville. Arguably, it had the run of the race there. It was up front. It had to be ridden forward from a bad draw, but nonetheless, it did well to hang on, I felt. Beat some decent rivals there, including Duke of Hazzard, who was a listed winner subsequently. It was 3rd in the Chesham, and Great Scott, who was a close-up 5th in the Racing Post. So, whilst, arguably could have had the run of the race maybe in France to a degree, I think there's probably a lot more to come from this colt. I think he's one of the better Godolphin colts, maybe looking at the year ahead. And I think, has the scope, I think, to improve quite a lot physically as well, and mentally. I think it probably has a lot of growing up to do, judging on its runs today. It wouldn't have learned maybe a whole lot in France, and certainly be very green on its debut. So I think it could be scope to improve quite considerably for this one, and an exciting prospect really for a yard that has several exciting prospects. But I think this one maybe is a little under the radar. So Al Hilali, I think we have a video of him. Maybe you can just have a look now.
Almaraid is next in 3rd, then Mount Sabora, followed by Al Hilali in natural place in the purple and white, more towards the near side. All Mankind is trying to pick them off the pace. They're running down towards the final 1/4 mile. It's Journey of Life, now about to be joined by the white cap Almaraid. And now Mount Sabora looks to get involved with blue and orange down the centre. Al Hilali staying on as well. Now down inside the final furlong and a half, Journey of Life joined by Almaraid, then Mount Sabora. Al Hilali running about a bit towards the near side, but certainly coming right into it now. Beating the rising ground, Al Hilali is stormed to the front from Mount Sabora. Then came Almaraid. Journey of Life now dropping away. And as they race up towards the line, Al Hilali to make a winning debut. Al Hilali has taken it. Cycling for second, Almaraid and Mount Sabora. They were clear from Natural Place and Dombra.
Okay, so I think they're my 3 really to follow.
Lovely. Thanks, Mark. So back to the floor, really. Has anybody got any final questions? What do you want?
It's illegal for me to ask a question.
Of course you can ask a question.
I've got 2 questions, actually, guys. First of all, about Too Darn Hot. If we can go back to subsequent to the Dewhurst, the 3rd ran poorly in America, and the 5th ran poorly at Doncaster. Did you ever sort of take that into consideration when you came up with your figure, or did you think they just ran too bad to be true, those 2 horses?
I'd certainly put a line through Anthony Van Dijk's performance in America. To me, I did think he was at his best when the ground was on the soft side in the well-run national stakes, and I don't think he quite ran to the same level in the Dewhurst. He didn't strike as a US 2-turn horse to me, particularly considering he was drawn really wide as well in America, and I thought the whole thing was a washout. He lost his chance when he couldn't break. quickly, which he was never likely to. From that draw, he was stuck wide all the way, and it just didn't really happen. We know exactly how good he is from the national stakes, and it really wasn't a doubt. He didn't put a different complexion on this at all. And Kuwait Currency did bomb out at Doncaster, but he raced very freely that day, and quite frankly, he had a win at Salisbury in a listed race where he ran to 105. He ran to 105 again in the Dewhurst. I don't see a performance of 76 at Doncaster where he goes very, very freely as altering my view of how good he is.
And the other horse I just wanted to ask your opinion of really is the horse that he won the juvenile turf in America, Line of Duty, the Dolphin horse. It was interesting, last year's Derby winner came from this race. So Line of Duty, I was quite impressed with him, and his form sort of stacks up, I think, rather well. I think the fifth horse in the juvenile turf subsequently came out and won. And if you look back to Line of Duty's run in the Prix de Conde, the third horse from that come out and won a Group 1. I just wondered what you thought of Line of Duty.
Yeah, I thought this was a very impressive horse, actually. I would agree. He's very unlucky probably not to win on his debut in Sandown. He ran into quite a good horse on sort of quite testing ground in Haydock in Great Scott. But his last three runs have been very impressive. I mean, he's gotten himself into a bit of trouble on occasion and got himself out of it quite easily. And he did a lot of running around in Churchill Downs. Which suggests to me that he has, there's a bit more left in the tank, and that his mind wasn't maybe fully on the job. So I think he looks very impressive. He's a very solid horse, I think, and he's one that he's actually quite interesting in terms of pedigree as well. He's by Galileo, obviously running for the Godolphin team out of Jacqueline Quest, the disqualified Guineas winner. So he's got an interesting pedigree. Prospects maybe of staying a bit further. Got a mile well as a 2-year-old. Yeah, I would agree. I think his form is solid. I mean, we haven't rated 114 at the moment. I would think there is potentially upside in that.
Yeah, I'd just add to him, he did get better as his stamina was tested. He overcame trouble to win the Condé, and the third horse home that day went on and won the 10 furlong Group 1 at Saint-Cloud later in the season. Admittedly, an ordinary renewal of that. I like what Line of Duty did at Churchill Downs, but if you compare what he did on the clock to what Newspaper of Record did, he's some way behind her. I mean, the final time doesn't stack up hugely well. The sectionals are more or less identical. If he's good, she's fantastic. I think he probably is good, and I think he'll probably do better as his stamina's drawn out even more this year. But so far, he hasn't done anywhere near as much as Newspaper Record has, so I do think he currently has ground to make up.
Anything else? No? Anybody else with anything? Zar.
Yeah.
Graham, I think you mentioned it earlier, can you just confirm Zar's rating from 1990, whenever it was?
Yeah, Zar's end of season rating, I believe, is 127. We have to go all the way back to 1997 for Zar's 127 to find a better 2-year-old performance than Two Darn Hot. If you go back a few years beyond that, the benchmarks are Celtic Swing in 94 and Arazzi in 91. Both of them ran to 130.
Mark?
Are these 2-year-olds ratings historically comparable?
Sorry, I didn't quite catch that.
Would you like to repeat the question, Mark?
Are the 2-year-old ratings historically comparable with present day ratings? Because I know the older horse ratings aren't. And,
Yeah, I just might have a look at that. I've done a bit of work on that. I would be reasonably confident, certainly from mid to late 80s onwards. I think, I suppose maybe in the early days of the classifications way back in 1978, 1979, it was still quite new, I suppose. So maybe there was a little bedding down period, perhaps. But I think certainly from the mid 80s onwards, looking at the statistics that we look at in terms of median levels and averages and so on, I'd be reasonably confident that that the levels do compare, actually. Yeah. I think there has been a consistency there. I mean, and I think, Matthew Tester over the years would have done a lot of work on 2-year-olds, and was very good, I think, at maintaining the levels on a consistent basis. And hopefully, myself and Graham can continue that forward. But certainly, the figures that I have certainly would suggest that they are. Within that, obviously, you could argue the merits of individual horses, maybe, but I think the levels per se are pretty okay.
So when you say mid-80s, is this after El Gran Senor in 1983 or after Carla Dancer in 1984? Or 124, 128 respectively?
Yeah, I would. Yeah, I think the further back you go, maybe the more questions there are. But I think we got to a stage sort of certainly mid to late 80s where I think something like El Gran Senor in 1983 was rated 128.
He was.
I think that holds up for me. Celtic Swing 130. It was a wide margin soft ground winner, I suppose. So you can always argue the merits of that, but I think the level of that year certainly I'd be happy with. Arazi obviously was a very good 2-year-old. I don't have any issue per se with those. I mean, I suppose maybe if you go back to 1978 for argument's sake, Tromos was rated 131. Maybe there's a question mark over something like that, perhaps.
Yeah, but from 1983 backwards, it was 128, 127, 128, 128, 123, and 131. Obviously, they're far higher than the present day ratings.
Yeah, look, I think, as I say, maybe subsequent to, I mean, I would be happy with El Gran Senor. Maybe subsequent to that, I think, there's nothing there that jumps off the page that looks, completely wrong to me. But maybe, as I said before that, possibly, I think, the levels maybe were a little inflated, perhaps. Recalibration is obviously a controversial word in handicapping circles, but I think, Too Darn Hot this year on 126. I mean, he compares to horses like Alharth on 126, Dream Ahead, Frankel, Hector Protector, Johannesburg, New Approach. I mean, looking at the list here, so I think they're all horses that I'd be comfortable enough with on those levels. The fillies this year, just in terms of the context, I guess there are only 3 champion fillies rated lower than Pretty Pollyanna. So I think whilst it was a good year, maybe in terms of the colts, I think it was pretty lackluster year this year in terms of the fillies. But I think the levels. I mean, look, I would certainly from mid 80s onwards, I'd be reasonably comfortable with.
I'd just add that, Mark, certainly these days, all of our figures are bedded down with historical statistics as well as times and sectionals and things like that. So every figure we arrive at, pretty much, it does have a lot of foundation in what's gone before. That's how we ensure our levels are pretty constant these days. We check medians, averages all the way down the file, as well as just the top classification horses. And I'd be very, very confident these days that our levels are pretty much the same year on year.
Anybody else? No? Okay, well, Graham, Mark, thank you very much indeed for your input. Hopefully this time next year you'll both be back in this room rather than being on a TV screen at the end of it. Obviously, if anybody has any supplementary questions, Graham is more than happy for me to give you his telephone number. So if anybody wants to give him a quick bell after this is then feel free to come and ask me and I'll give you his number. But other than that, I think that probably concludes the review of the 2-year-olds. As I say, Gary and I are here. If you do have any questions for either of us, I can't promise to give you the answers given that they're 2-year-olds, but we'll try our best. Gary probably is in a better position than I to do that. But thank you very much for your attendance, and hopefully we may see 1 or 2 of you, or maybe all of you, up at the landmark a bit later on.